has joined us now.
So chairs, we have started the recording. It is 6:30. Marcia, since Joanne hasn't signed in now, if you'd like to take kind of the lead chair.
Sure. I think that means calling the meeting to order for at least the Accessible Communities Advisory Committee, and maybe for some of the other groups, I'm not quite sure. We do have a quorum here. We don't have somebody who's taking minutes, but I'm not sure we really need to do that. So
Jess, would you bring yours to order, please?
Yes, I'd like to call the non-motorized committee to order. I think we have a quorum. There are 4 I saw online, including myself. And I will try to take notes if we need to, but I don't think we're taking minutes as well also.
yeah.
And I see Joanne has come on. If she could join, have her meeting to order, please. She's not needed. There she is.
I am
There you
been trying to get on for 15 minutes.
go.
It keeps bipping me in and out. Sorry.
Great. If you could call your meeting to order, please. Your committee.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Do you want me to read the initial thing?
Yes, if you could just, bring your, officially open your committee, and then I can show the agenda and we can walk through the agenda.
Okay. This is a joint committees workshop on shared use path. I'm echoing in my own ear. Hang on a second. Okay, better. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm Joanne Clark, Chair of the Parks Board meeting. I'm sorry, I'm disjointed. There we go. Welcome. I'm sorry.
If you like, I could walk through the agenda for us tonight.
Joanne, you just need to say we're calling the Parks Advisory Board meeting to order.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
That's
I was
it.
for tonight.
You don't have to go through the
calling-
whole speech that we normally do.
Okay, we're calling the Parks Board meeting in order. To order. I'm sorry.
So for our agenda tonight, I am David Ford with Kitsap County Public Works. Can everybody see the agenda?
Yep.
Yes, yes.
We'll have welcome and introductions, then an introduction from Commissioner Gelder. Then we'll have a presentation from Public Works and Parks on shared use paths. Then we'll have a presentation on accessibility from Marcia. Then we'll have a presentation on the Seuss Creek Trail. And we may know how to really pronounce it by the time we're done. With Joe and Diane and others. Then we have time for discussions and adjournment. And so I can stop sharing our agenda. And with the chair's permission, invite Commissioner Gelder for his introduction.
Sure. Well, I can probably quickly add some minutes back to the agenda, right? I don't need to spend a whole bunch of time in terms of introductions, but I definitely want to appreciate and thank everyone for coming together as part of this joint meeting. When you think about sort of accessibility and connections throughout our community, it's the goal behind this really was to hopefully, as we're all doing our own pieces of the puzzle, that we can maybe break down some silos, starting to have some cross-pollination and some synergies emerge. So I really appreciate everyone coming together, whether your parks, non-motorized, or the accessible communities advisory committee. Because that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make those connections and make sure that we, as we move forward in the county, whether it's within the park system, whether it's on the roadway, whatever, that we create facilities that are accessible to everybody in our community to the best of our ability. So thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
I think I gained you about at least 4 minutes.
Thank you. Shared use path presentation by PW and Parks,
Thank you.
Public
Um,
Works and Parks.
Thank you. I'm David Ford with Kitsap County Public Works. And also tonight we have Alex, if you'll introduce yourself.
Evening, everyone. I'm Alex Wisniewski, Director of Parks for Kitsap County.
And we also have Aaron Nix from Parks and Melissa Moore from Public Works. That's part of that. What we, Parks and Public Works would like to discuss today is just identify what a shared use path is and isn't as we go through, and give some examples how in Kitsap County the concept is evolved, moved around, sometimes been constructed, sometimes not been constructed, and how it fits into the community structure, or can fit into a community structure for transportation, access, and recreation as you go through. As with everything in the county, we start with what is the comprehensive plan? What is the policy context for walking, biking, and rolling, and all the other non-motorized elements that we work with? One of the avenues is, the key avenue is our comprehensive plan that outlines how the community is going to grow and how it exists and how the aspirations of the county as it moves forward. In that policy context, further analysis is done for the Kitsap County non-motorized plan, which looks at how we connect our communities with non-motorized walking, biking, rolling between and within communities. So we try to find out, how do we connect non-motorized movement throughout the county, connecting communities, connecting points of interest, and within the community, within our urban areas, within parks, within our elements. And for parks, it has the same, as Alex will chime in when he wants. You have your plan, the Parks, Recreation, Open Space, which further delineates and explains how the county goes about providing parks, recreation, and open space, which also has a generalized concept about how we have access to and within our parks and open space, and also recreation. How does that access and recreation for walking, biking, and rolling integrate in our park system and with the rest of the county? As part of that also is the comp plan is very clear on accessibility, that whenever we do activities throughout the county, that it needs to be for access for all people. And so how do we accomplish that in a transportation or recreation in the community environment for walking, biking, and rolling? And so those are the types of aspects that we want to talk about tonight. From the policy context is, how do we take the overall vision for the county, the non-motorized elements of it, and the parks element and the access elements for biking, walking, and rolling, and non-motorized, to provide connections, recreation, and access. Within the non-motorized plan, we do have a hierarchy of paths and trail facilities types.
David?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I know that Marcia had raised her hand, so I didn't know if the question was, didn't want to get too far down if
Oh,
she,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I apologize for not mentioning the fact that one of our members is blind. So if you could attempt some description of the pictures that you're showing, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
I will try. So in our non-motorized plan, we have a chart that displays all of our types of trails that we have through. It's a hierarchy of paths and facilities that connect communities and provide access to and within parks, open space, and communities. In this scale, the top one that we're emphasizing is about road-based paths. So this is a path that is adjacent to a roadway. The remainder of all the ones are non-road-based paths and trails, different types of trails to provide different types of connectivity and access within parks, or actually within communities also. Moving on to the next one, with the side path is the highest one, and the side path is a shared use path that's just adjacent to a roadway, while a shared use path, which is the highest one in the list of trails, is a separated pathway that is not adjacent to a road. A side path adjacent to a road and a shared use path are both shared use paths, but have different designs and user experiences that we're going to talk about. Parks also has a matrix of class that is almost exactly the same thing as the one we were showing. That shows a different level of trail types of trails, from rough, you barely know there's a trail there, all the way up to a shared use path that's going through. So it demonstrates that within the non-motorized and the parks design guidelines, the shared use path is a facility for access. For the shared use paths, there are a number of design elements that we go for. There's a lot of federal standards. One great research element is the small towns and rural multimodal networks, that has a whole discussion on how different types of facilities integrate into networks. And some of the things they talk about in this for a shared use path is that a shared use path provides a travel area separated from a motorized traffic for bicycles, pedestrians, skaters, wheelchair users, joggers, and other users. So it's a separated facility. That's one of the key ones for non-motorized. They're also required to be accessible for all users, including those with mobility devices and visual disabilities. They're also intended to be a facility that encourages bicycle and walking for all types of people to go through to provide access. And they're typically in areas where provide that the most amount of people are actually using those facilities. And they're often located in parks, along rivers, beaches, and in greenways, or utility corridors where there are few conflicts with motorized vehicles. And that's one of the elements also, is to be able to do these activities either as transport, or as recreation, or a combination, that you are in a vehicle-free area. Some of the design guidelines for a shared use path are that they are a hard surface, predominantly asphalt, shared use path that's typically 10 to 12 feet wide, with shoulders that are typically gravel on both sides. It's for all users, pedestrians, bikes, skates, wheelchair users, and joggers. They also are low stress. The path is wide enough that multiple users can pass each other as we go through. They typically, especially have a natural environment. So if you're not next to the roadway, you are in more of a natural environment and experience. And there's typically lower noise levels because you're not near noise generators like roads. Safety is very high in these facilities because they are separated from vehicles, and there's enough room for multiple users with different abilities to pass and utilize the trail. And for accessibility, there are highest level of accessible pass systems. They're hard surface and they have slope limitations. So there's a maximum amount of slope and climbing that people will do as they use this. And for access, it primarily connects to and within communities, parks, and open space. Now, the side path is also sorry, our cleaning people are starting to come, is just exactly like a shared use path, except it is adjacent and connected to the roadway. So the biggest difference is it's still a 10 to 12-foot path with side path, but there is a minimum requirement distance between the roadway and the path. It's 4 to 5 feet, and it can be it can be just grass or a swale. It can be a Jersey barrier. It can be rumble strips or landscaping as you go through. So it is that separation and adjacent to it. Just like a shared use path, the side path is for all users. The stress level is a little higher here. It's lower than if the walker or the biker was on the roadway or on a trail right next to it. So relative to the road facility is lower stress. It's still a wide path, it's separated, but it is impacted by noise from the roads. Safety is similar to a non-road. It's separated from vehicles, but there will be conflicts at driveways and intersections. Accessibility is the same, with the exception that a roadway does not have limitations on slope or the angles. It just needs to match the roadway. So if a roadway is going up a hill, it matches that roadway's slope and angle going up. While if it was going through, it wasn't adjacent to a road, you would try and design it to have a lower slope as you go forward. Access it does the same thing as the side part. It connects to and within communities, parks, and open space. Oops. And the user experience is very important to a shared use path. It is a low stress environment for the bikers, the walkers, and the rollers as we go through, because they want to use it for getting from point A to point B and also for recreation, sometimes a bit of both. It has lower stress levels that allows for people of all ages and abilities to more readily go to them, and it increases connectivity and access. The chart here on the right shows a number of different facilities and different types of bikes and gives some percentages. Is of those people, and this is for bikes, but it also is for pedestrians also, and people rolling are in wheelchairs going through. If you're for those people who are willing to go out and walk or bike in the environment, if you're part of the road system, very few people will do that, other people that want to. If you start to separate it, like with a bike lane, but it's in the travel way, it's still very few people, 5 to 9% of the people who want to will feel comfortable in that environment. As you start to separate the bike and the pedestrians from the road work, the number of people that want to do this or are willing to do this significantly increases because they're more comfortable in this environment than walking even on a sidewalk next to a busy road or on a path next to a busy road or on a shoulder. We have some examples in Kitsap County. So just up north of Silverdale, we have the Clear Creek Trail, which is a shared use path going through some very environmentally sensitive areas. That was part of our environmental restoration of that area. And it connects Trigger and Bangor to Silverdale, and also connects to the Clear Creek Trail system, which is soft trails within Silverdale. Up in the north in Hansville area, we have the Port Gallium-Sequoiam tribe has a side path adjacent to Little Boston Road that goes from the Hansville Road around towards their administrative center. And they will be expanding this in the near future to go all the way to their administration center. We also have the Sound Olympics, which has some elements that on Bainbridge Island, the first mile has been built. Winslow, you can notice that this one is actually a little wider than 20 because it's in a very dense area and with expected high usage. And so they made it a little wider right on that Winslow area. And the newest one we have coming out is the side path that's right along here on the Johnson Parkway in Paulsbo, right off 305, where they have just added a side path and a tunnel underneath 305 for bikes and pedestrians and rolling as go through. And we have the White Horse Trail up in Indianola, going through a natural environment with strategically working through it as you go through the trees. Oops. Now, those are the ones that we have built on it, but there's been a lot of activity on system level concepts, big concepts of shared use paths. And these ideas have come from the citizens as part of that, and have had a lot of ups and downs, ins and outs of trying to move forward and find a concept that will take ground and move forward. Some will remember the Mosquito Fleet Trail concept of trying to connect Kingston along all the Mosquito Fleet Trail things along the coastline, the Sound Line, all the way down to Manchester and southward, which had a combination of shared use paths and other types of facilities as you went through. The north-south spine, which is part of the non-motorized plan, was envisioned where the concept of how do you get people from the south of the county to the north of the county, and could we use this power line alignment as a route to get from A to B, north to south. The Sound Olympics out of the String of Pearls, which looked at the whole northern area and trying to connect Bainbridge Island to Paulsbo to Kingston to Port Gamble, trying to connect the parks and open space in that area. Also with the Bethel Road in South Kitsap, connecting to the expansion of the Cushman Trail. How do we connect from that nice facility down in Pierce County in Gig Harbor up through to Port Orchard? Gorst in two different elements. One was the Sinclair Inlet concept of how do you get around from Port Orchard to Bremerton. And also more recently is with the Gorst improvements, how do we get non-motorized through Gorst as we try to improve that area. And a new emerging one that came out of the south is connecting the parks down in the southern part of the Kitsap. Is we have the new Colchester parks here, and I just lost the name.
Wicks Lake.
Wicks Lake, thank you. Connectors. So how can we connect those? Is there a way to make connections through there? All big concepts and trying to look for homes and to see if they can move forward. And we've moved forward on some of those. We've done analysis on Miller Bay Road, trying to figure out, can we put a shared use trail from Four Corners out down back to the park and Indianola Road? We've looked through the divide block between Miller Bay Road and Port Gamble and did more intense planning level to try and find alignments and concepts. Is it viable? Port Gamble, from Stottlemyre through Port Gamble to Port Gamble through the park and through Rainier Developments property, how, as going through developing that concept. And now we're currently looking at the North STO, is revisiting some of the aspects of this area and see, can we find an alignment for the shared use path through there. Down in the south on Jarstead, between Kitsap Lake and West Belfair Road, trail alignment that came from the public. And the Clear Creek Trail, expanding that through the Markwick extension out to Ridgetop and possibly north of Trigger, expanding those trails. And our current design work, and we are looking or designing shared use paths in Port Gamble. The tribe is designing the extension of the Little Boston side path. Private development is also adding to our mixed use. Arborwood is providing a shared use path through their development. Also, development down here in Dickey Road is also providing shared use as part of that north-south spine. And so what we tried to provide today was from the context to how over the last 15 to 20 years, the county has tried to figure out how do we connect communities, how do we provide recreation, how do we provide access between and within communities, parks, and open space for biking, walking, and rolling, and our different efforts to bring those forward. Some have been successful, some have not been successful, some are still open to whether they'll be successful. And trying to figure out, each one of your committees has a role in this. The non-motorized committee, the Parks Board, and the Accessibility Committee all have key elements of how this can move forward and how the county as a whole can move forward with the shared use concepts. And that is our shared use presentation for tonight.
And thank you so much. On our agenda, the next person up will be on accessibility. The presentation is by Marcia Cutting. Go ahead, Marcia.
Good evening. I want to start by talking about why accessible trails are important. Most of us have a general sense that we feel better after we've been out in nature, and research supports that. Specifically, time spent in natural settings has been found to contribute to improved attention, lower stress, better mood, reduced risk of psychiatric disorders, and even increased empathy and cooperation. Experimental research has demonstrated that just a few moments of green can perk up a tired brain. In one example, Australian researchers asked students to engage in a dull, attention-draining task in which they pressed a computer key when certain numbers flashed on a screen. Students who looked out at a flowering green roof for 40 seconds midway through the task made significantly fewer mistakes than students who paused for 40 seconds to gaze at a concrete rooftop. Researchers at the University of Washington have found that contact with nature is associated with increases in happiness, subjective well-being, positive affect, positive social interactions, decreases in mental stress, and a sense of meaning and purpose in life. Time spent in nature is particularly important for children. Researchers in Denmark use satellite data to assess 900,000 residents' exposure to green spaces from birth to age 10, which they compared with individual mental health outcomes. Children born between 1985 and 2003 who lived in neighborhoods with more green space had a reduced risk of many psychiatric disorders later in life, including depression, mood disorders, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and substance use disorder. For those with the lowest level of green space exposure during childhood, the risk of developing mental illness was 55% higher than for those who grew up with abundant green space. Improvements in physical health from being outside are associated with lowered blood pressure, strengthened immune systems, and improved sleep. For all these reasons, it is clear that our elected officials and Parks departments need to focus on making the out of doors accessible to everyone. So how can parks be made more equitable for people with disabilities? The state gets high marks for building accessible bathrooms, though not always for maintaining them. Over time, for example, the dirt around the concrete pad on which a bathroom rests can get worn away, leaving what can become almost a step up to access the bathroom. If portable toilets are used and there's only going to be one, it should be one of the larger wheelchair accessible ones. And this is the point at which I want to start sharing my screen. Okay. Come on, you can do it. Okay. This cartoon shows a man shoveling snow off steps that are next to a ramp. A wheelchair user asks him to shovel the ramp, to which he replies, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." The wheelchair user responds, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." The caption below the cartoon says, "Clearing the path for people with special needs clears the path for everyone." I'm not a big fan of the phrase special needs, but I have to take what I can get sometimes. Accessible parking spaces are also important. I suspect that there are people who get to a trailhead, see a space reserved for people with disability placards or plates, and think it's the most ridiculous thing they've ever seen. If someone's going to go hiking, I can imagine them saying, "Why do they need a special parking space?" I can tell you a couple of reasons. One is that if you have a van with a wheelchair ramp, you need a space to extend the ramp and be able to get off the ramp at ground level. Another is that vehicles with a wheelchair lift can require excessive extra space at the side for loading, or in my case, a space that is relatively flat. Trail surface is an important consideration. Pavement supplemented by boardwalks in wetland areas is probably the most universally accessible surface, though other surfaces can work with adequate maintenance. Wheels roll well on pavement, wheels of all sorts and sizes. Wheels on wheelchairs, on walkers, on strollers, on bicycles, and on tricycles. People using guide dogs or white canes can easily detect the edge of a trail that is paved or otherwise well-defined. A trail of compressed 3/8-inch aggregate can work well too, provided it has been compressed thoroughly, and dirt trails constructed that way also can work. The Larry Scott Trail south of Port Townsend is a rare, shining example. More often with rain, dirt trails become full of mud puddles, waiting to ensnare anything with wheels. They also become places that most wheelchair users avoid for fear of creating further damage to the trail. Sand is horrible, and loose gravel scarcely better. Deep gravel also can snap a cane being used by someone who is blind, as can poorly maintained broad boardwalks if the cane gets stuck between the slats. I appreciate the newest member of our committee, Chris Kolkhoff, reminding me that Braille needs to be part of signage. A raised line drawing of a trail can aid spatial awareness. For example, if a trail is a loop, a simple line drawing depicting that is helpful. Bathrooms should be identified by Braille and large print, especially if they are separated by gender. Basically, any print signage should be accessible with Braille that is weatherproof. All that said, I'd like to show you some pictures from a trip I took to Central Washington this summer in an attempt to hike more of the Palouse to Cascades Rail Trail. I think it formerly has been known as the Iron Horse Trail or the John Wayne Trail, just so you know what I'm talking about. I spent a week hiking most of the westernmost part of the trail before COVID hit. So this year I made Ellensburg my base to see how much more of it I could cover. Boy, was that a mistake. The Ellensburg area of the old railroad bed has become 2 tracks for bicycles, spread too far apart for a wheelchair. This picture shows the 2 relatively smooth tracks and the rough surface between them. This means that one side of the chair or stroller or walker is on a fairly smooth surface and the other is on very rough gravel. The gravel has been packed down enough that I wasn't likely to get stuck, but it was not a pleasant ride. This is a picture of one of the smooth tracks with large gravel on either side and cows grazing in the distance. For me, because I mostly still have the full use of my hands, it was just uncomfortable. For friends who have less use of their hands, it would have meant being unable to keep their hands on the joystick controller to steer their chairs, which can be dangerous. Then there were the gates. This picture shows a metal swing gate across the trail with a dirt track around one end, the first one I came to. I understand the wish to exclude vehicles such as four-wheelers, but I really wish people would do it in a way that allows wheelchairs to pass. Just for the record, users of wheelchairs, including power wheelchairs, are defined as pedestrians under Washington State RCWs. I did manage to get around this, but it was a bit more exciting than would have been optimal. I met a pair of bikers from Seattle at the second gate, and they offered to help me try to get my chair around it. I have the advantage of being able to walk a short distance if I have something to hang on to, though many wheelchair users do not. What you may not be able to see from this picture of the dirt path around one end of the gate is that there are several, excuse me, several large rocks sticking up, on which my chair probably would have high centered. This part of the trail is sparsely traveled, especially during the middle of the week, so I had no confidence that I would have help on my return trip. I turned around, did some of the trail in the other direction until I ran into another gate and notified my niece, with whom I had filed a hike plan, that I was giving up for the day. The next day, I went to explore the Beverly Bridge across the Columbia River, hoping I could be one of the first wheelchairs to cross it, since it just opened this summer. Alas, there was deep gravel on the approach from both directions. The following day, I decided to try a different section of the rail trail that didn't look too bad from the street. Unfortunately, after a short distance, it was just like the other section. I'm pretty stubborn though, so I continued along until I came to another gate. This picture shows a narrow dirt path at the end of the gate, a drop off on the far side. There are fences and mountains in the distance. I gave up on the rail trail and went to check out a park that one of the online trail guides recommended. Here I encountered dirt trails that were not well constructed. This picture shows a rough dirt and gravel trail over 4 culverts with a variety of shrubbery in the distance and water on one side. And this is a picture of the rough dirt and gravel trail curving off into the distance with shrubs on one side. At one point I got stuck. I was close to I-90, so highway noise would have covered any attempts I made to call for help. However, this was one of those times when it was better to be lucky than good, as sailors sometimes say. Excuse me. There was a disc golf course adjacent to the trail. I hadn't seen any golfers, but just as I was beginning to get concerned about how I was going to extricate myself, 2 appeared. With their help, I was able to get the chair back to a firmer part of the trail. This picture shows the bridge that I encountered where the dirt trail had worn away, leaving a lip of between 1 and 3 inches up to the wooden bridge deck. I wasn't sure my chair would be able to get up onto the bridge. Fortunately, it could. Though this trail was far from ideal, it did give me the chance to see 2 deer just across a small stream from me, only one of whom was willing to pose for a picture. This picture shows the deer with the stream in the foreground, grass where the deer is standing, and trees in the background. The next day I drove to Yakima, where I rode the Yakima Greenway, which is a good, mostly paved trail, part of which followed the Yakima River. This is a picture of a sign describing an unpaved side trail called the Human Spirit Nature Trail, and signs forbidding camping in vehicles. I tried to see if I could take this, and it quickly became apparent that was not a good idea. Then I drove to Wenatchee and took the 10-mile paved Apple Capitol Loop Trail and hit the jackpot. Half of the loop is on the west side of the Wenatchee River, and the other half is on the east side. This picture shows a well-packed gravel trail with grass separating the trail from the river. There are a tree and a picnic table in the grassy area and more trees on the other side of the river. This snapshot has a well-packed gravel trail with a hill on one side, separated from the trail by a low wall of large rocks on one side, and a board and wire fence on the other. The river is on the other side of the fence. And this is the view from one of the bridges crossing the river, showing the river below, the shore with shrubbery on one side and low mountains in the distance. And if you time it right on this trail, you can finish up at the farmer's market and have really tasty chicken tacos. This trail was so good that I made the hour-long drive again the next day to do the northern extension of the trail. In conclusion, I would like to point out that pavement, in addition to promoting accessibility, can protect fragile environments by keeping people on the trail. A good example of this is the Paradise area on Mount Tahoma, or as it's better known, Mount Rainier, where paved trails protect fragile alpine meadows. This last picture shows 8 people in a variety of wheelchairs lined up along the trail in the Paradise area with the snow-covered top of Mount Tahoma in the background. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions for Marcia?
I have a
Seeing
question.
none. Oh, I'm
Can I-
sorry.
Sorry.
Sure.
Marcia, you showed a picture and talked about a lip of a few inches between a trail and a bridge. And I think you said you were able to get over it, but I'm wondering, is there some limit? You know what I mean? Like, what would be an accessible connection? Like, is it if it was 2 inches or is it 6 inches? I mean, 6 inches sounds crazy, but
The challenge there is that there are many different types and qualities of wheelchairs. Manual chair users probably actually could get up a 6-inch lip, I think. At least some of them could. Some of them might not want to try, but I think some of them could. My wheelchair, technically they say my wheelchair, I think, is supposed to be able to do a 3-inch lip. I've never tried that and I don't want to. An inch or two I'm comfortable with, more than that I'm not. And somebody that has like an entry-level power chair probably would not have been comfortable trying that bridge.
okay. Thank you. I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think that you said that in several places along the trail, you would stop and then you'd be thwarted by deep gravel. You say, okay, well, I can't go there. Can you tell that when you first get your chair out of your car and you pull up to it, or how I guess I'm wondering, how is a person able to tell that it's not going to be accessible?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Basically, we have been trying to develop a whole series of reviews. There are different trail apps. There's All Trails, there's the Washington Trails Association, and there's at least one more, the name of which is escaping me. And when we go out and check out these trails, we try to file trail reports so that other wheelchair users can know. There's also a Facebook group of wheelchair hikers, and we're trying to, let people know about good trails and trails to avoid there. I mean, that's one of the challenges. When you look at the start of a trail, you have no idea what lies ahead. So you just hope.
That makes sense.
I see some more hands. I'm sorry.
Okay, I will stop talking then and give somebody else a chance.
Okay, Linda, Barry, Merritt.
I just wanted to mention that, I wanted to thank Marcia for sharing this, but I and a group of other people, I know Alex, David were there with Marcia when she tried to navigate the North Kitsap Heritage Park, and it was a real learning experience for me personally, because I would have thought coming in from the Norman Road entry, because that's gravel and flat, that it would be easily accessible. And man, did she persevere, but the deep rolly gravel was really treacherous. If we hadn't had a group of strong guys to help her out, I don't know how she would have gotten through it. And then when we came in, when she tried again and came in from the Miller Bay side, there was a lip that I've walked over, I don't know how many times and never noticed it, but it was, just I think it was two 2x4s with a narrow channel to let the water go through. And, she took a run at it with her wheelchair and couldn't get across it. And it would have been something that, I literally had never noticed. So it was an eye opener for somebody who'd been in a park that frequently, to be there with somebody who was trying to navigate it in a wheelchair, and just gives you a whole different perspective. So I just wanted to thank Marcia for educating us all there on that, and mention those things that I had stepped over, I don't know how many times, and never seen. Just had never really noticed. So thanks.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Rick Feeney?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I was just going to mention something Marcia kind of clued on, was that if you go into the lower Clear Creek Trail, you're on some wooden paths going through the marsh area. I once tried that on my bicycle in kind of the early spring type of weather when it was still slick. It is really slick. Slick to walk on, slick to, and I would imagine that wheelchairs are the same. Have you experienced something like that?
I actually haven't, probably because the wooden parts are pretty flat, and we have 4 wheels, so we don't have to worry about like sliding sideways. It's not that they couldn't be treacherous. Actually, there's a funny story about the Clear Creek. We did the Ride the Clear Creek event and invited people to come, and got great cooperation from the Parks Department and from the Clear Creek Trail Association, and they were trying to help us out. And so they said, we're really trying to get this trail in shape for you. We put down fresh gravel, and we were just like, oh no. Luckily, we all got through it.
Thank you, Marcia. I have 2 more hands, and then we'll have to move on for time elements for everyone to get to their agendas this evening. So let's go with Lisa Hurt with the Parks Board.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Marcia, for the presentation. You raised a few things that I kind of thought of as a hiker, biker, or anything. We all have to think of our skill level, even when we're hiking or biking, and what trails we can access, what type of equipment we have, what's safe for us to use. Just like a wheelchair, I've seen some incredible wheelchairs that are specifically designed for like back trail riding. So, a way to, I think, alleviate those problems would be, like you said, signage that would say, this is a class 1, 2, 3, 4 for, for accessibility, for what kind of equipment that you might have or such, because as you saw that one that you couldn't even attempt to do, it had flood warnings, and it said, water floods through there and there's gravel. Of course, you're not going to go try that. A lot of hikers wouldn't try that. Obviously it's a higher skill level trail. So I guess my point being is that, there's certain trails for certain things, and, and what do we want cross section, for accessibility? Are you folks wanting to be able to go from like point A to point B, like Paulsbo to Port Gamble in your wheelchair? And I know that there are some wheelchairers that want to go all the way to the Olympic Peninsula, which is great. But, going through parks might not be the way, because there's, again, certain obstacles that would make that fairly impossible to do. It would take up the whole park to serpentine through the park to get to a level of ability to have a 3% rise for accessibility. So I guess, yeah, that's just a point I wanted to make, is that, you know, it might be an easy way to just say, this is a certain type of trail for certain types of accessibility. Because
One of the challenges is that
Be
we don't
accessible.
have any standard system for designating that. I've worked with some people and developed a diamond system, you know, like how they have for ski trails.
Mhm.
I have that, you know, if anyone wants to use it, but it's been kind of hard to get it adopted by people. So the challenge
it's
is
a
to
great
let
idea.
people know what the trail is like.
Mhm. It's a great idea.
That is a great idea. And thank you so much, Marcia, for your input, and
You're welcome.
all of you others that have commented. And when you do have special abilities, even if it's a temporary situation or a permanent one, it really opens your eyes. Like Linda was said, she's been in the park many times and doesn't realize, you know, and when things happen and you have to be in wheels or on wheels, it makes a big difference on your where you can go. And working with that, it's going to take some time and effort to get, like, you have some good system ideas, you know, keep working on that and keep bringing those forward. And I'm sure it'll be looked at favorably. So moving on tonight, we have the Sue's Creek Trail with Joe Miles and Diane Everson. Are you here?
Yeah, oh, I am.
Oh,
Or
there's
just-
Joe Miles.
Yes, hello.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull up the presentation. This is Diane.
Oh, hi, Diane. Sorry.
I'm Diane Iverson, resident of Bremerton, Washington, and an advocate within West Sound Cycling Club. And with me tonight is Paul Dutke, my husband, who's also a member of West Sound. And you will meet Joe Miles, who's president of Friends of Sue's Creek Park, as well as Mrs. Kaylee Kidd from Bremerton, who's mom of Bentley. And what we're going to do tonight is give you a photo essay of Sue's Creek Trail. And then you're going to hear from Joe about his leadership and his motivation as president and what that park means to him in the last 25 years of the work that he has done in collaboration with King County Parks. And then I met Kaylee Kidd while we were cycling up in Port Angeles at the Spruce Railroad Trail in the parking lot, and asked her where she lived, because I like to kind of interview people. And Kaylee lives in Bremerton, about 5 minutes from us. And she was up there with her son Bentley, and we have just begun to get to know each other. So you'll get to know Kaylee tonight.
Okay.
So the Sue's Creek Trail, why and how did we get involved in even talking about the Sue's Creek Trail? Last June, when we attended the Kitsap County's community input session, talking about the Sound to Olympics Trail out of Kingston, after that meeting, I realized I wanted to learn more about trails that go through critical habitat areas. I'm a cyclist, I'm a walker, and sometimes I have to use a wheelchair for several weeks at a time because I'm a bilateral amputee whose legs sometimes need a break. And so I bike a lot of trails because that's my passion, but I didn't know anything about Sue's Creek Trail. And I was directed there because Sue's Creek seems to have pulled together key stakeholders in the planning process who endorsed a document that is a management document. And the key stakeholders that came together and helped plan it with the Parks Division. The Parks Division facilitated it. Friends of Sue's Creek were partners in it. The Middle Green River Coalition was active at the table, the Rainier Audubon Society, and the Sierra Club. And they all signed off on the final document of what would happen to design and implement the Sue's Creek Trail. So we're going to give you just a quick overview of what it looks like and then let Joe tell you a whole lot more about the park and the trail.
Yeah, so where it is south of Lake Washington and south of Brenton. And you can see here it's east of the Interurban Trail and the Green River Trail in Kent. So it's in South King County. And the red shaded area on the map shows you the area of the Sioux Creek Trail. And the part that we rode is the dark blue line under the red shaded area.
The Sioux Creek Trail, if you Google it, you'll actually find a document that is extremely informative. And this is just a snapshot of the information in there. But when you read it and you find out that it's 5.5 miles, that the key players were King County, Friends of Sioux Creek, Middle Green River Coalition, and the Rainier Audubon Society and Sierra Club, you go, if you're kind of a nerd about this stuff, you actually want to go and read the document. So the attachment here, if you want to know more about the backstory over the last 25 years, can give you that information.
Yeah, well, this link is available on our presentation, and this is, so the full presentation is available. Can David forward that to people who ask? Or-
Yeah, David has a copy. So what we're giving you tonight is just a short version of a longer version. If you want to have the longer version, you're welcome to ask David or us for a copy of it.
Yeah.
So this is me on the Sioux Creek Trail. I'm in my recumbent trike, and Paul's going to tell you a little bit about the environment around it and what this part of it is all about.
This is the north end of the trail, and this section of the trail is over the top.
What's the matter?
Pardon? It's a
Oh,
paved
go ahead,
trail.
I'm sorry.
It's a paved trail over a wetland. And everywhere you see these are concrete panels with metal railing on the side. And everywhere you see that along the trail, it's actually elevated. And in sections that aren't critical habitat, that move into firm ground that's not part of the wetland, then the railing goes away and it's just a paved asphalt shared use path.
And as you can see, this trail has power lines on it. It goes through a power line section. And that's the main reason you can go 5.5 miles on it.
Yeah. So here I'm standing on the side of the trail, and this section of the trail is part of what is elevated. But some of the concerns that people have as far as the wildlife, in this case, the wildlife just moves under the trail where it's critical habitat. So you can see this trail is robust enough to support utility and maintenance vehicles. And we saw snakes and just running on the side of the trail. And a lot of this is over wetland and marsh area. So in this case, it's the trail's running along a steep slope, but it looks like you just have a growth on both sides, but actually it's on the side of a rather steep hill. The trees on the left are like 30 feet lower. And on the right, maybe the ground is only a couple of feet low,
And with our measuring device, we found out that this trail is 12 feet wide, and it truly is wide enough for walkers and people on bicycles and people in wheelchairs to navigate each other and feel very comfortable, even during a pandemic or even when it's crowded.
Yeah, the entire trail is all ages and abilities from end to end with handicap parking and
Your phone's
accessibility
upstairs.
on both sides. So this just shows you that the undergrowth just comes up lushly on both sides of the trail in this location. So there's in the lower right-hand corner, there's a sign that says critical habitat. It's right behind Diane off to the upper right corner. And so this is an area where there's a park. So the ground is solid, but the wetland is off to one side. You could take a trail over to the side, and then it's an elevated boardwalk with a fence. The wetland's on the far side of the fence, and you can't go into it. So the trail itself defines where you can and can't go, but it's a paved path all the way through critical habitat that people use all day long, all the time.
And one of the things that Marcia mentioned is that a paved trail keeps you on the trail and out of the wetlands. And we found that to be true here. And this part, whenever the paved trail is not asphalt, but no, it's asphalt, right? Asphalt, that's when it's not in the wetlands or, and so here the wet area is right next to the trail. And in the document that we gave you a link on, this little family of ducks is mentioned in there. So that document was written years ago, and this family's been producing a lot of ducks just off the trail. So the habitat of this place, it seems to be very well connected to and working for the ducks and other animals.
Yeah, it hasn't impacted or damaged the health. I think it may have improved the health of the habitat. And this is more wetlands way off, the trails on one side, and there's an equestrian path along here, and this is just a kind of a dense wetland off to the side of the trail, towards the south end of the trail.
And at both ends of the trail where we park the car, you have accessible parking and you have sandy cans that are handicapped accessible. And so I give this 5.5 miles of trail as somebody who has to deal with accessibility issues as an A+. And at this time, I'd like to introduce to you friends of the president of Friends of Sioux Creek, Joe Miles, and I'll have him tell you a little bit about himself and why he's so involved in this trail. So here is Joe.
While you still have a slide, you want to show Kaylee?
Not yet.
Not yet,
No.
okay, all right.
Okay, Joe.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this meeting. Diane reached out to me after this walk and asked me to share my thoughts on it. I'm happy to do that. I mean, even though I don't know anybody on this meeting, I really sense that many of us deeply have a lot in common. We care about our community, and that's the broad community, not just people that are living there, but the wildlife that's there and the whole surrounding area. And these trails are so important to get people to expose to these natural areas. And Marcia touched on it. It just, I mean, you just touched my heart when you were talking about all the benefits of exposing people to natural areas. Crime goes down, lower stress. There's statistics showing, lower domestic violence. And I think we all know that when we walk on what you're calling the shared use path that's separate from the roadway, it's a totally different experience. And that's what we have here on Sioux Creek. My wife and I, back in the 80s, were looking for a place to live, and we wanted to live next to open space. So we had heard that King County had just purchased, through what was called their Forward Thrust program, a huge corridor out here along Sioux Creek that didn't have any trails at the time. And so we bought next to it and built our home and, have been there. And the trail was constructed, and we formed a group, many of us who kept encountering each other on the trail and volunteering for various things, formed a group, Friends of Sioux Creek Park. And we do a number of things that typical nonprofits do. We do our litter pickups, and we do everybody, and it's all free, we're all volunteers. We do nature walks, owl prowls, bird walks. We've counted over 100 species of birds that live in the park. We do restoration projects, a lot of things with elementary schools and scout groups and other people that want to do things in this park. But we do other things too, which we're really advocates and protective of this park. If there's a zoning change adjacent to the park, we will rally and fill the hearing room to make sure the decision makers are aware of this park and the importance of it. And we've worked to establish urban separator, 1 unit per acre in the urban areas that abut the park to kind of keep the density down. And we also advocate each year through, the county has a conservation future fund that we nominate parcels to extend this trail, hopefully extending it all the way to, from the Cedar River to the Green River, through these communities. So we do a lot of things like that. And I think besides the things you're talking, you know, the walking, the hiking, we've got, of course, bikes, but we've also got a horse trail that runs in some cases next to it, but kind of runs parallel to it. And it's more the gravel kind of situation. And of course, people can walk on that too, who want to kind of get away from the paved part and can walk up in there. But I think in short, it's so important in these trails. What I think a couple of things I want to emphasize is when you expose people to the natural environment in these parks, they begin to appreciate it. And some of the demographics in our neighborhood, there's families and kids that will never have the opportunity to really go even up to Mount Rainier or other natural areas. And it sort of follows the urban growth line through this part of King County. So families in apartments and such, this is their exposure to the natural environment. And when you get exposed, you know, you start appreciating it. And honestly, you get advocates when people are using these trails because they have access to these beautiful areas. And all of a sudden, you've got an advocacy group that's pushing for environmental protection. They're pushing for more parks for everybody. And so I think what you're talking about is exciting. Personally, Commissioner Gedler mentioned in the beginning about people are sort of in silos, and it's trying to break out of those silos. And I think about my own personal experience of thinking about silos. I mean, I started out as a wildlife biologist. I got my bachelor's and master's and became a birder and published some research on wildlife and initially became very much quite a tree hugger, and like nothing in these areas can be touched without, catastrophic problems. And then actually went on and got my civil engineering degree from the University of Washington. I'm a licensed civil engineer. I went to work for Washington DOT, and I worked for King County Public Works, primarily on stormwater and roadway issues. And I started realizing the importance of accessibility in combination with environmental impacts. And then further along, I became, I was the land use director for King County for about a decade and processed a lot of developments looking at impacts and such. And I retired a couple of years ago from Washington State Department of Natural Resources. I was a district manager for their aquatics division, where we looked at a lot of developments of state-owned aquatic lands in natural areas. And I've sort of broken down the silos in my life to come back to mainly what I think what Marcia was talking about is, I think there's just huge community benefits of getting people access to these trails and getting out there and exposing them and appreciating them, so that they not only want to protect the trails and sort of the transportation links, but they really become advocates for the wildlife and the natural environments that's there. So I guess my pitch is seize this opportunity that you've already started in Kitsap County, and for your roles on these committees, let it be your legacy that you pushed it forward and got more of these in place. And one person along the trail, told me once, they said, I don't know who created this trail or protected this land. I don't know their names, but I sure do appreciate it and thank them for doing that. And I think hopefully somebody 100 years from now will look back and say that about, the people on this Zoom call. So anyway, this is the kind of thing I could get on my soapbox for hours, but I'll stop it with that.
Thank you, Joe. The next slide is, I'd like to introduce you to Kaylee Kidd, who lives in Bremerton, and here's a photo of Kaylee and her family. So Kaylee, you're on.
Hi, Diane. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. I honestly just feel so blessed that you and I ran into each other on that trailhead a few months ago. I am a Navy wife. I live in Bremerton. We moved here 6 years ago. We had my son Bentley in these photographs. This is a photo on the left-hand side of my whole family, my husband, my daughter, who is 3, and then my son Bentley, who is in his, it's called a gait trainer. We call it his walking device. It's what he's been using for the past 2 years. And then on the picture on the right is a picture of him using that walker inside of our neighborhood with his sister, who is also a bike lover. And Bentley was born 5 years ago, 7 weeks early, with a rare genetic abnormality, and spent many, many months in the hospital. And after he got out, was actually on a ventilator to help him breathe, which he is now off of. He's been making huge strides health-wise. But my husband and I just made a pact with each other that there were going to be a lot of things in Bentley's life that held him back, and we were not going to be one of them. And anything that he could experience, we were going to make sure that he experienced. So I actually have crazy pictures and videos of us hiking with him, like in a baby carrier with his ventilator on our back, just letting him see things that, you know, doctors said that he would never see. And now he's a grown man. So he thinks, and he's independent and walking in his walker on his own. And that means that we don't carry him anymore. And so that's where I met Diane and Paul. It was on a path that I had looked up, and actually, I think Marcia mentioned it, on All Trails, and saw that it was a path that was primarily paved. So I knew that Bentley would be able to walk all or most of the trail. And I got to talking with Diane about how I was really, I'm sure as all of you were unaware of how inaccessible a lot of paths and trails are to those with assistive mobility devices. And I guess, you know, I had spoken with Diane, and she asked if I could speak tonight just to kind of like emphasize the use and need for these shared paths. Because I know it's something, the picture on the left is us at Clear Creek. It's a trail we walk almost weekly. It's the trail Bentley took his first steps on, that my daughter learned to walk on. Marcia also mentioned it as well, creating the buffers between the road and these being away from the road, how much safer that is for individuals with mobility devices. I know not only because my son is a toddler and likes to run away, but because he's in this device as well and learning to walk on it. We only let him walk freely on shared use paths because we know that the worst thing that could happen to him is he might walk into water or mud and get wet. He's not going to walk into a roadway. It's disheartening sometimes when we do take him to paths and that he's not able to complete them. He doesn't quite understand that he cannot access everything. I know, what was that, the diamond system, Marcia, I think you mentioned that as well, for marking trails for certain levels of accessibility. I think that that's also just a fantastic idea. I know my point, I don't like to speak for Bentley, so my point is a view is only from a position as his caregiver and his mother, and so I can only kind of speak to what I see him doing versus his own opinions. And I do see, you know, the importance of a paved trail, Marcia, I'm saying your name right. Is that correct? Or is it Martha or Marcia?
It's Marcia.
Marcia, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I want to make sure I'm saying that right. It is difficult when you just use certain materials like gravel or any type of loose material. I kind of think of it when it comes to certain wheel types, like when you're pushing a shopping cart through a store, like the smallest rock, like you could hit like the little anything, something fall off in the aisle and your cart just whoop, just run and you end up hitting something, or it can be that little. And so emphasizing the importance of something that's paved, very hard, compacted, that wheels are going to be easily rolling over versus getting stuck on something or hitting something and then having an accident because that individual might veer off of that path down a hill, like something significant could happen. And then especially the importance to the wetlands. Marsha, I think you mentioned this as well. The gapping between wooden slots. I know we were here when the trail first went in and it was absolutely fantastic, but over time, those boards obviously have gotten loose and there's significant gaps in between. And so now Bentley's also learning to use a walking cane because he's also visually impaired. And so that does happen. We still take him out to Clear Creek to practice his walking. But it does happen where he gets caught in between those slats. And so it's not just important that these paths go in, but also their maintenance and upkeep over time to ensure the continued accessibility of these paths. And so, I'm just here for community support. I am the community. We're here. We are using these paths every single day, all the time, ensuring that our kids have ways to get out there, especially the kids that don't have access to those higher skill level trails, like Bentley does. These are the paths that he can maneuver and feel confident and independent in. And that's very, very, very important. Joe, you mentioned it. Marsha, you mentioned it, the importance of being outside. And Bentley has spent most of his life inside a hospital, and that's not what we wanted for him. And so any chance we get to get outside, he does it, and he begs to go outside all the time. He wants to go on walks, wants to go on hikes, wants to be outside. And so the use is there. I absolutely believe that the more accessible these paths become, the more people they will attract. And it won't be something that we'll be thinking about, oh, is there really a need for this? We'll see it and we'll say, absolutely, there's a need for this. The people just needed to see it.
Thank you so much, Kaylee.
Of course, of course.
Should we stop sharing?
Yes, we will stop sharing the screen and let you take it back. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of that. It was wonderful. It's open for discussion now by the chairs. Anybody would like to make a comment at this point? Raise your hand. Jess Chandler.
Hi. I want to say that I thought this was fantastic presentations. I really appreciate everybody who spoke. I think that there's so much going on and everybody's absorbing so much, but one of the things that that I'm hearing is that, fundamentally there's going to be there's going to be a decision structure made, right? And what I'm curious about is when there's going to be a trade-off, when there's going to be a decision, hey, we're going to have a shared use path, but it can only be this long, or it can only be in this part of this space because of either the slope or the cost or something to that effect. When there's a trade-off made, what can we advocate for to ensure that there's something that feels like a meaningful natural experience? So is there something, is it just getting there? Oh, I have pulled my chair in a little ways and I'm now surrounded in a little circle by nature? Or is there some amount of distance or time or some experience so that we would understand? Because clearly we're not always going to be able to pave a shared use path, through every park and trail system. And we all know that, but I don't know how we understand and can advocate for, what is still a meaningful experience. So if anybody could talk to that.
Yeah, Jess, I'd like to say something just from my point of view as a caregiver. I think that from my experience, I think, Lisa, you touched on this, like there's gonna have to be almost kind of a give and take, like how there's different hiking levels for different experienced hiker. For example, I would not go rock climbing. I have no experience doing that. I should not be on the side of a mountain somewhere. That's not my place. But I think just where you're going with that is, you know, then how much do we give? I think we give as much as we can. You make it as accessible as you can, to the point that you can. And then when you get to the point where you're like, we can't do this right now. We're not saying if it's a budget issue, we're not saying never, we're saying this is how much we can give right now. And this is it. And we're continue to work on this. If it's an accessibility issue, like you're saying, slope, there's natural elements in the way, then that's, you know, where Marcia's diamond system comes in, where like, this is for more, is less accessible. This is for more experienced hikers, people with more technical mobility devices to get through here. Maybe we're telling people they need assistance through here. If you're gonna go, don't go by yourself, bring a buddy to help you in case you get stuck, that type of thing. So I think like what you're saying absolutely makes sense. I am not expecting the whole world to be accessible, because that's unrealistic, because it's not even fully accessible to myself, like I said. But as accessible as it can be, I think that's the direction that we go.
Thank you. John Pearson?
Yeah, this is for Kaylee and for Marcia. Have a little background. For a number of years, I was in charge of the North Meadow area as far as maintenance on the Clear Creek Trail, and did a lot of work there. And I have to admit that never noticed the fact about lips on the boardwalk and that sort of thing. But wondering, have you gone to the board of Clear Creek Trail and have you mentioned this to them at all? I mean, I'm no longer involved there because I had a falling out with the beavers, and they were destroying more than I was able to repair. And I'm like, no, we're not going to go there. So since then, I've noticed that the same problems are still there with the lips on the boardwalks and that sort of thing. So I never thought about that. Never thought about it. We did see a lot of people from, what's the name of the retirement home right around the corner there? Racing their wheelchairs on Clear Creek. It was amazing. But if you go to talk to the people at Clear Creek, I know that they may not understand it either. I just learned something brand new tonight, and I'm 80 years old, so.
Thank you, John. Let's go with Rick Feeney.
Oh, so I came from Lewiston, Idaho. And so if you've ever been to Lewiston or Clarkston, they have the Lower Granite Dam had forced levees alongside the river on both sides. But there are literally, I'm guessing probably 20 miles of shared use path on both sides of the river, on both sides of the Clearwater and the Snake River. And it has thousands of people daily using it. And it's been there now for 35 years, and it's 40 years, and it is highly used. So they will find a user. Thanks.
Thank you. Joe Miles?
Yeah, yes, just kind of speaking to, I think it was Jess's question about how you actually get there. I think my experience has been that you just take it piece by piece, a particular park. And I think with reasonable people around the table, you can say, okay, this is clearly not going to work for this, but it will work for that. And you just evaluate that particular parcel. And I'll tactfully try to say this too. I think if there are the right people around the table who can understand other people's perspective, I think we all see the world today now sometimes becomes very polarized, where there's no give and take and you go nowhere. I think if you can get a particular piece of property, say a park or an area where there's a trail discussion, you get people that have common sense and realize others' needs and recognize the cumulative benefit of doing something. And there may be some impacts that may have to be mitigated. Get those people together and get your plan and move forward. It can happen. So that's kind of my editorial.
Thank you, Joe. Linda, Barry, Maris.
I just wanted to mention is probably at least 10 years ago, when we were meeting with Clallam County and trying to learn from Clallam County and their successes on the Olympic Discovery Trail. Rich James, who had been their public works person lead on the Olympic Discovery Trail, described kind of Washington State's methodology for planning non-motorized connections as taking spaghetti before it's cooked and breaking it up and throwing it, and then hoping the pieces will connect. Because, what's really important is one thing, if you've got, somebody who's not going very far, but if we're trying to build a system that also works for bike connectivity and, commuters and multi-purposes, it's really important that you have overall continuity, that you have to build it in segments because that's the only thing we can do. But we also need to plan for those multiple different types of users being able to go further. And I just thought that his analogy was pretty telling, because you would never design roads just in segments. It's really important if you wanted to serve bicycles too, that you have that connectivity.
Thank you, Linda. Brian Watson.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Kaylee, wanted to thank Diane, Marcia, the other people who spoke tonight, who gave me the opportunity to see the world through another person's eyes. And I think that kind of empathy should be a core value that we hold dear as we think about trail development, shared use path development. I myself can use both my legs. I can see pretty well. I can hear pretty well, but I could walk out my door and get hit by a car. I could get struck down by some kind of disease. I don't know. And I want the world to be a place where everybody has a chance to experience the beauty that we have here. And Kaylee, your son Bentley, I want him to be able to go to places like the Clear Creek Trail or the North Kitsap Heritage Park, and to be able to use his mobility devices to hear the birds and the frogs and smell the air. That's the kind of world that I think we should aspire to in our county government decision making. And so as we think about this, I want us all to take a break, to take a moment and just consider what the world looks like and feels like for somebody who's different than perhaps we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to take one more, and then we're getting close to the end of the meeting. And so we'll go with Diane Iverson and Paul Ducky.
Hi, thank you. I've been thinking the last few weeks as I've been thinking about tonight's presentation about what sort of data do we have around accessibility as it relates to our parks, and what is the definition of accessibility, and what are the parameters we'd want it. So if we say we have accessible parks, what does that mean? So I asked the parks director for King County, I said, how do you feel as your director of parks about accessibility? He says, we are so far behind. We need to work on this. This is on the list of things to do. And And so it's probably on our list of things to do is what does the data show as to what we have as it relates to accessibility based on some measurements? And then where do we want to go from there? Because I think everybody probably agrees, we don't want 100% of the trails in a park to be paved. I think the model at Port Gamble is an excellent model where you have 3 different levels of pavement types in the park. But I bet we don't have the data because we've had so many new parks in the last 10 years about where do we start from? What is the data right now? And then where do we want to go from there? Because that helps you figure out whether you're making any progress. And it also forces you to come together and think about the question. What's accessibility? So that's just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Alex, do you want to finish the evening with some thoughts?
Thanks, Joanne. Actually, this is David's show. I'm going to pass it back to Mr.
All
David
right.
Fort.
Well, thank you. On behalf of Parks and Public Works, we'd like to thank all the presenters and the committee members. We have been recording this webinar. We will have it available. We'll post a link to it and also all the presentations. Marcia will send me hers. I sent her an email as part of that. It'll take a little bit, but we'll also we'll work with Rebecca and also your staffs to provide you the links where you can put it onto your websites, individual committee websites as we go through. And so it'll be there as a resource as we go forward. But as they're pointing out is we've had a lot of concepts on how to access, how to do shared use paths, the big overall systems to incrementals, and just how do we move forward. It's going to take all 3 committees and the whole communities to find those ways to move forward, to make it for people can access between communities and within communities and parks and open space. And thank you very much.
And
Thank you,
thank you
everyone.
for all attending and all your input, and appreciate it.
Thank
And
you,
this
everyone.
Thank you.
concludes our meeting this evening. Thank you.
Thanks.